Hello and welcome to episode 9 of What's Tom Reading. I'm Tom, and today I'm talking about the Great Courses audiobook called Forensic History, Crimes, Frauds, and Scandals, performed by lecturer Elizabeth A. Murray. This one was a stomach-turning stroll through some of history's most grisly forensic cases, as well as some of the really cool true crime kind of things that have happened. If that's your thing, you're definitely going to love this one. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. All right, so as I said, today I am talking about this Great Courses book on forensic history. Man, it was a good one. You definitely are going to want to check it out. Again, that is, it's a Great Courses audiobook, so I found it on Audible. I'm sure you can find it elsewhere, but it was, I do recommend it on Audible, by the way, because it's really well done, and it's performed by the lecturer herself. It's called, once again, Forensic History, Crimes, Frauds, and Scandals, performed by Elizabeth A. Murray. And this was a really, really awesome little kind of compilation of lectures, sort of like the History of the Vikings book that I did earlier. I'm a big fan. I don't know if you are. I hope you are, dear listener. Hope you're a fan of audiobooks. And I've found that it's a really effective way to for me to be able to fit reading into my schedule because, I have a commute and I don't have as much time as I would like to have to be able to sit down and open a paper book. So audiobooks are a really great way for me to kind of close that gap. I still do really love reading paper books. I don't think anything really replaces that. And one thing that I like about Audible is that, and this is what I personally do, you can turn up the speed. So I listen to them on 2x speed. Just that's about, I think I mentioned before, that's about the rate that I read at. And so that's what's comfortable for me to kind of hear it at. Some people's voices, though, I don't know if it's because they have like vocal fry or something like that. Some people's voices don't do so good on the 2x speed. So if that's the case, then maybe I'll turn it down to like 1.5 or something like that, just because, if they have like a lot of like undertones, then at high speed, it sounds very staticky and kind of annoying. But anyways, this audiobook is a compilation of lectures, and it's on like forensics and true crime. And it's not just like murder. There's a lot of murder, and like heads up. I don't know what the appropriate thing to say here is. So I'll just say what's trendy and cool. I'll just say trigger warning on this one. There's some grisly, nasty details. And if you don't have a really strong stomach, I recommend probably not reading this. It's weird because I really liked the book. I really liked it. But it's weird for me to say, I loved this, but I don't recommend that you read it if you are this type of person. But in this case, I'm gonna say, like, if you're not into like the true crime genre, and if you are easily spooked by, and fair dues to you, right? Like if you're easily spooked by murder and maiming and grisly nastiness, then this probably isn't going to be a great fit for you book wise. I actually have a very strong stomach for this sort of thing. Or at least I thought I did until I was reading this. And then even I was kind of like, on some of this stuff. So as I get into it, just know that I'm going to be talking about some of these things that are going to be kind of sensitive. I'm going to I'll spare you the worst of the gruesome details, because I just don't like to talk about it that much. And because, this is a family friendly podcast. All right. My wife listens to this and she's not into the gruesome blood and guts and gore. So I'm going to leave that off, of this podcast, but just know if you pick up the book that there's a lot of that. And so if you don't have a strong stomach for that, then definitely, steer clear. But let's talk a little bit about the lecturer first. So her name is Elizabeth Murray, and she's a forensic anthropologist, and she's a professor of biology at Mount St. Joseph University. she has a PhD. She's super smart. She also works as a forensic pathologist, anthropologist. She does autopsies and things like that. And she has worked a lot of like actual real world cases. So she's not just like a theoretician; she's also a practitioner, which gives me a lot more respect. As you've heard before in previous episodes, I tend to have more respect for practitioners who have honed their craft over a lifetime than theoreticians who went to 3 years of graduate school and then teach you what other people have learned over lifetimes of studying. The big disconnect there for me is, have you actually done any of this before? And Elizabeth Murray definitely has. She's a pro. So when you're listening to this stuff, take comfort in knowing that this lady really, really knows what she's talking about. And the delivery is actually very nice as well. She's charismatic. She's got a nice voice. She's one of the people that I can turn up and listen to on 2 times speed without, hearing lots of, crackles in their voice. I don't know. I don't know if it's more women than men, because most of my experience has been that with male narrators, the voice crackle thing at high speeds. But I have heard anecdotally before that vocal fry is something that women do more often. So I don't know. But at any rate, Elizabeth Murray's voice is very pleasant, even at high speed. Perhaps especially at high speed. I don't know. I didn't listen to it at lower speeds. So anyways, so she's very experienced, and she starts off this lecture series just like she comes right out of the gate swinging. And this is why I say, if you don't have a strong stomach, then just don't even bother with this, because the very first thing that she talks about is Jack the Ripper, and it is horrendous. It's horrific. Such violence, such vile, evil. And one of the things that she talks about is kind of the MO, the modus operandi of the killer, who was never caught. I'm not sure if you know anything about Jack the Ripper, but they don't know who he was. A lot of theories. And he's a very, very famous serial killer who attacked in London, mostly ladies of the evening, or prostitutes, as it were. And his crimes, the reason they kind of were able to connect them all to one guy is because it's not because so there's some similarities in the modus operandi, but I didn't know this. They don't just look for similarities. They look for escalations in type, which is very, very fascinating to me. I never really thought about that before, but it's really, really what they're looking for is like, yes, this is similar to the way that he's done things before, like similar weapons, similar stalking practices or whatever. But not only that, it's not just, this is how they separate between a copycat and the real killer, is the real killers tend to escalate over time. So they'll use the same general like stalking tactic. They'll use the same weapons most likely, but then over time, their killings just get more brutal and more brazen as they become more unhinged. And the madness and that's the other thing that, I don't know. I think, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I think most people are probably capable of killing under the right circumstances, right? In self-defense, or, for a just cause, or, patriotism, or to protect the people that need protecting. There's a lot of reasons why people throughout history have killed, including, less wholesome reasons such as greed and anger and hatred and, perversion, all sorts of things. But I think most people in their deep, dark places, or whatever you want to call it, have the ability. I think it's been well studied, right? Like if you look at different psychological studies, people have the ability to do pretty horrendous things under certain circumstances, right? Like the Milgram shock experiments. That's like one of the most famous kind of experiments to talk about. And I'll just give you, in fact, no, I'll save it for the science corner. We'll talk about the Milgram shock experiments in the science corner, okay? Because this whole podcast is basically about forensic science, and there's some really cool stuff there. But I'll just talk about it in the main, and then we'll go talk about something else, maybe those Milgram experiments when we get to the science corner. But which means I'm going to have to move what I had for the science corner out into the main. But that's okay. That's okay. We will adjust, and we'll adjust on the fly here. But basically, you can do horrendous things under the right circumstances. That I think is pretty normal. What's not normal, though, is sort of this escalation in viciousness, this sort of like pathological like hunting of people and stalking of people. And then when you catch them, like the desecration of the person that you're attacking. That's really psychotic stuff, right? And so kind of the argument from this lecturer is that people really have to be pretty broken in order to become serial killers. And so whoever Jack the Ripper was a broken person, and he actually did inspire a number of different copycat killings because his crimes were so widely broadcast. But the investigators they were pretty well able to determine what was a copycat killing, because it was people just basically copying, obviously, but basically imitating what they had heard in press releases, right? Jack the Ripper usually he killed his victims with 2 slashes to the throat, right? And so, across England and even the United States, because this was like one of the first big mass media serial killing kind of things that was covered. There was photography at the time and lots of newspapers. And so all around the world where these newspapers are being read, you start to see copycat killings pop up where women are turning up with 2 slashes to the throat. It's not like it was a plague, but people were pretty sure that those were copycat killers, right? But the real Jack the Ripper, the way that they were able to figure or attribute his killings to him was that he was using the same MO, but he was adding sort of escalations into it, and his crimes got worse and worse and worse until kind of the end phase. He snuck into a woman's house and cut her throat twice, obviously, but then he just did all sorts of other horrific things. He disemboweled her and stacked her organs around places and cut her eyes out and her face off and her ears. And it was just, I'm sorry. I told you I wasn't going to go into too much detail. That's about the furthest I'm going to go into for this episode. It's gruesome. It's grisly. I'm not really into, murder porn. So I'm not going to really perpetuate that, although this was very, very interesting. But that's the way that this starts out. And so right away, and I got to tell you, this is kind of funny and also kind of gross. But when I first started this book, I'd finished the book previously, Red Roulette, and I was like, I want to try something different. So I fired this one up. And as I was going, I had just started making dinner and I was cooking a little bit of meat. And then she just launches into this tale of Jack the Ripper, and it ended up with that most grisly murder there with the organ stacking and the horrific crime scene and everything like that. And needless to say, the meat did not taste so good after that. It really kind of turned my stomach. And actually, I'm man enough to admit that I had a nightmare that night. I thought I tend to think of myself as like pretty impervious to regular scary things that go bump in the night. I'm a big dude and nothing really scares me. Like I'm okay to like walk outside at night or whatever. Like, and I'll recognize that that's a privilege of being, large and mean looking. But in like that night after I first started listening to this, I had a nightmare that involved a deranged serial killer breaking into my house. And so this, like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. So but it starts out kind of super grisly to kind of get the hook in you. I think that's the idea. But then it moves on to being less grisly and talking about like more cool things, like super awesome heists that have happened, assassinations of world leaders. Like one of them was really cool, like the Bulgarian Secret Service during like the Soviet Union days tried to kill a dissident. And so what they did is they like hollowed out a platinum, like a little bead of metal made of platinum, hollowed it out and put a little bit of ricin powder into it and then sealed it up with a wax ball. And then like put an injector in the tip of an umbrella, and then someone just came up and poked this guy in the back of the thigh with this little teeny pellet that had ricin in it, and he died. But ricin's kind of sketch because it looks and acts a lot like other poisons or other it imitates other problems that the body can be having. So it's really hard to find out, and it's also super rare that people are poisoned with ricin. But anyways, the Soviet KGB kind of backed this killing, and they were using this method to off people left and right. And we don't know how many people they killed with this method because it was extremely hard to detect this tiny, tiny little pellet underneath the surface of the skin. And this minuscule amount of ricin poisoning didn't show up on toxicology reports or anything like that, but it was devastating. It killed people. And so there's lots and lots of really cool forensic information in this. And so if you're into that, and I know my friend Joshua is a listener of this podcast. He's out in medical school going to be potentially, I think, a forensic pathologist himself. If not forensic, then definitely pathologist. and he is much smarter than I am and has a much stronger stomach than I do. And so, more power to the people who can do that. But it's not for me. That's one thing, as a younger man, I entertained fantasies of maybe going to medical school someday. But then I was like, you know what? I'm really not into blood and guts and gore and the smells especially. And this Dr. Murray lady, she did not spare the description of the smells, and for me that was the worst. Like I can almost imagine it. I don't know if you've smelled like rotten meat before, but she talks about like these different techniques that people are using to like see how long a body has been decaying and stuff like that. And it's just kind of like like I don't know, just made me gag as I was listening to it, because I just kind of pictured the smell of just rotten meat. I worked in a butcher shop. I have stumbled upon the smell of death many times, and for me, so that smell description was just very vivid. There's some other stuff in the book that talks about like kind of how science has progressed in ways that is very, very beneficial for figuring out mysteries and solving crimes. DNA evidence, for example, she talks a lot about that. She even talks about fingerprinting. So she kind of takes this like early stages, first sort of forensic efforts, kind of Jack the Ripper era, and then all the way to like modern, like basically if you're at a crime scene, they can find out that you were there. There's no possible way for you to not leave DNA at a place. So my advice to you, and just so you know, this is legal information, not legal advice. I'm not your lawyer, blah, 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 blah. But my advice to anyone is don't do murders. Don't do murders, don't do crimes, because first of all, it's evil. And if you're a psycho, get some help and figure out a way to, I don't know, find an outlet for those psychopathological urges or whatever, or psychotic urges. I don't know what the right terminology is for that. Psychopathological made me sound smarter, so I went with that. But psychotic is probably the right way to say it. Anyways, if you're a psychotic person, go get some help. Don't do evil things. But even if you're just like a run-of-the-mill sketchy burglar type, like they'll find you. Right now, contact DNA technology is such that like if you leave like some skin cells on the ground or on a doorknob or something like that, they can find you. They can get a DNA profile of you, and those DNA databases are becoming more and more complete as time goes on. You will not escape. You will not escape long term. You will not escape short term. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. This has been your public service announcement. And actually, in the random corner, I'm going to do another public service announcement. It's kind of along those same lines there, but. One thing that really jumped out to me in this book is that like you're able to solve not just like grisly murders, but using science and the scientific method, you're able to solve just mysteries, right? So one of them was, and this a lot of people thought that this was a grisly murder. So let me tell you this story. So there's two young boys. They skip school and they go fishing at the pier. I think they're in San Francisco. I want to say they're in the San Francisco area. So they go fishing at the pier, and one of the boys accidentally falls in, and he falls a really long way and hits the water really hard. Maybe he hits something on the way down. I'm not sure. But anyways, he's knocked unconscious by the fall, and he never resurfaces. And the other boy thinks, oh crap, I'm going to be in so much trouble. And so he runs home and he tells everyone a lie that the last time he saw his friend was at some candy shop or something like that. And he just tries to go about his life and be like, oh yeah, I totally, we skipped school that day, but then we went to the candy store. And that's the last time I saw him or whatever. And then I went home and that's it. That's all I know. Sorry, officer. Best of luck to you. And so there's this kind of like this manhunt to try and find this boy as he's reported missing, and he turns up in the water. And when they fish him out of the bay or wherever, they find that his body has been very, very badly mutilated. So like his, again, maybe fast forward this part if you got a weak stomach, but his eyes are missing. His tongue is missing. His lips are like mutilated. His anus is prolapsed. And the going theory is, oh my gosh, we have a psychotic, evil child predator on our hands right now. Like someone kidnapped this boy, perhaps from the candy store, and then brutalized him horrifically, and then dumped his body in the bay. And so the police go around rounding up all of the, as they call them, like simpletons or feeble-minded people, the perverts, the convicted child predators and things like that, go around, round them all up. There's kind of like this all hands on deck, all points bulletin in the community and everything. Everyone's looking for this deranged psycho killer. Everyone's terrified and everything like that. And it just so happens that someone who is privy to the case, and I'll let you figure out how they're privy to the case if you read it. But basically, someone who's privy to the case is like, this doesn't seem right to me. There's something definitely going on here. And then as things progress, basically the long story short, marine wildlife experts get kind of called in to kind of look at this, and they're like, oh yeah, that's crustacean activity for sure. Like, definitely these markings were made by crabs. This is how they eat. Like, if a dolphin dies or something like that and sinks to the bottom, they eat the eyes first, they eat the tongue, they eat the soft tissue, the lips and things like that. And they'll also eat around the anus. And so it's just because that's as the body initially starts to decay in salt water, those areas kind of soften up, and then that's what's easiest for the crustaceans to get at. And so I know that's a hideous, like, grisly thing that happened, and it's also a horrific tragedy, right? But it's something that was, I think, a huge relief to the boy's parents to find out. And the friend, by the way, did eventually come clean and say, yeah, we were fishing and he fell in and I didn't know what to do. I didn't see him pop up. I tried to climb down to see him, but he never surfaced. And so I ran home. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I thought maybe people would think that I killed him. And so I lied. I'm sorry. But yeah, he fell in. And the boy, who had been found, who died, he didn't have very much water in his lungs. So that was one of the reasons why they thought that he, had been killed and then his body dumped, is because there wasn't very much water in his lungs. Because when someone drowns, typically they inhale a bunch of water, and a lot of water is found in the lungs. And that's one of the indicators that they were alive when they went into the water. However, that doesn't take into account people who fall from a great height into the water and they're knocked unconscious by the fall. It doesn't take a lot of water. There's not a lot of panic, obviously, when someone's unconscious, and they drown relatively peacefully and easily, if it can be said that, dying in such a way is peaceful and easy. They don't have like the thrashing, gasping, sucking in lots of water that is common in people who enter the water while they're conscious. And so that explained why he didn't have very much water in his lungs. The crustaceans explained kind of the really nasty state of his body, and the story all checked out. And the boy's parents were very, very relieved that their son did not suffer horrifically at the hands of a psycho. And all of the so-called feeble-minded people in the area, I'm sure, were also very relieved that the mob dispersed and wasn't hunting after them anymore. It's kind of a running theme. And again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the random corner, but it's kind of a running theme that certain groups of people end up getting scapegoated for crimes. Typically, even in the Jack the Ripper case, there was a group of people that thought that it was, ethnic Jews that were in the area who were responsible, or perhaps that Jack the Ripper was a Jew himself or something like that. Or Croatian, or like there's a bunch of different, scapegoats throughout everything, all days and ages. And so, I mean, just think about it, right? We probably have our own set of scapegoats here too that we're a little bit oblivious to, because people tend to be oblivious to the scapegoats that they're using, unfortunately, right? It's not like, I mean, they wouldn't make a good scapegoats if you were conscious of the fact that they probably didn't do it, right? So that's something that I think that we could all use a little bit of a deeper look into. I'm not gonna post any theories here on who I think might or might not be getting scapegoated for different things, but we should definitely be conscious of the fact that that's a thing that humans at all times and everywhere have done. And so we all are almost definitely, like, the likelihood of us also doing that, I think, is 100%. So bear that in mind. Criminal justice is not an easy thing. In fact, criminal investigation is not an easy thing. And that's one of the other big themes of this book, is that a lot of these mysteries go unsolved for a really long time. You've heard of like cold cases. And that's because generally the people who commit crimes are stupid. I know that's kind of that's kind of a bummer for you to hear, because there's this trope of like the genius serial killer who's like, he's super smart and he's super dangerous. He's the apex predator or whatever. Generally, though, people who commit crimes are of a much lower intelligence than people who don't. In fact, low intelligence is kind of a decent predictor for criminal activity. Lack of ability to be able to foresee the consequences of your actions, kind of that sense, that juvenile sense that, well, yes, people go to jail for this, but I won't go to jail because I'm special and I'm so smart, right? As a general rule, and this is kind of something that I've learned through just my experience at law school, as a general rule, people who are breaking the law, especially criminal law, typically are not super sophisticated, especially like these like front page violent crimes that you hear about. These guys get caught most of the time, almost all of the time. Occasionally, though, there are anomalies where it's really, really difficult to determine who did this. Like there's not a lot of evidence. There's not a clear motive. There's not, the family and associates of the victim they've been vetted and determined that it was probably not any of them. And so if the police are left looking for a stranger who has not left very much evidence at the crime scene and doesn't have any other prior convictions, like if a fingerprint turns up, they can't match it to one in a database. If some DNA turns it up, they can't match it to someone in a database, right? Stuff like that. So these cases, they just go cold because the police don't have anywhere to look. There's no witnesses. There's no DNA evidence. There's no material evidence left at the scene, or very little. Friends, family, and associates are vetted thoroughly, and they all have good alibis. It all checks out. And so the police are basically left scratching their head, especially in some of these very, very large cities, as to like, well, someone just randomly decided to break into this person's house in the middle of the night and bludgeon them with their bedside table lamp. So we know, kind of who they were, how they died. And sometimes they can even say like why they died. Like, the jewelry box was emptied out, so this looks like a burglary. And they have no evidence, no other evidence to go on, right? Those kinds of cases go cold. And a lot of times, if in case any heads of agencies are listening to this, I'll just pass this along, right? But this lady, she advocates for never, ever, ever, ever throwing away any evidence from a crime scene, right? Because, there's kind of like that. I saw a joke about that somewhere where it was like hard to solve crimes. I think it was actually John Mulaney who said like detectives show up at a crime scene and they're like, hey, there's a bunch of blood out in the stairwell. And it's like, gross. Hose it off, right? like before they had DNA, all they could do is like a little bit of rudimentary blood typing, and that's not good enough to convict anyone, right? Like, oh yeah, this guy had O negative blood, so he's one of the 23% of the population that have that, or whatever, right? Like blood typing was not a super great way to do this. And they got more sophisticated over time until now they're like, yeah, we can pretty well identify off of these like few skin cells that are on the ground who did this. So I guess the point of advocacy is don't ever get rid of any evidence from a crime scene. If it goes cold, keep it all as well preserved as you possibly can using the maximum amount of technology you can, because we don't know what technologies are coming down the pipeline, right? Like if you were able to use a time machine to go back to the Jack the Ripper case and say, hey, make sure you keep, the skin and blood from under the victim's fingernails or whatever, because we're going to be able to find out who this is based off of those skin cells. Like we'll be able to know the exact person who did it. They'd be like, yeah, probably not. Right. So we don't know what technologies might come down the pipeline for solving crimes. And so definitely keep all the evidence. And if you are ever miserable and unlucky enough to stumble upon a crime scene, don't touch anything, right? Don't mess with anything. Call the police right away. If it looks like the person is still alive and can maybe use some help, definitely get in there and get your hands dirty and provide whatever assistance you can. Get the police and ambulance on the way. But if you show up and the person is like very much dead and the crime scene is very much despoiled, then don't touch anything. Do not contaminate it with your own presence. That's for your safety and for the integrity of the investigation. So, I've kind of run long on this. This is definitely one that you want to pick up, though. If you're into true crime, there's murders, there's heists, there's assassinations. She even talks a little bit about like crimes against humanity, right? Genocides and the forensic work that goes into detecting like mass graves and things like that. Very fascinating, very, very interesting. Bank robberies. I don't know what else to tell you. This was awesome. I really loved it. I'm going to stop right now, and we're going to head over to the corners, though, because I want to kind of save a little bit of time for what I have planned for the random corner today. So without further ado, let's head on over to the science corner. Okay, welcome to the Science Corner, and as promised, we're going to be talking today about the Milgram shock experiments. Now, these are among the most famous experiments in all of psychological studies or whatever. Very, very fascinating. You can read lots and lots about them. You can find lots of resources about them. I am going to give you like the 1,000 feet up perspective on this because I don't want to take a ton of your time. It's not the main topic of the show. And I think there are other people who can do it better justice than I am, but I'm just going to make you aware of the existence of these studies if you're not already, and then refresh your memory of them if you are. And hopefully that will shed some light on kind of what we're talking about today. So basically the idea was Milgram, this guy, he was a psychologist who was studying and like I said, 1,000 feet up perspective. I'm not going to tell you who he was or what he was doing or who was affiliated, right? But he's a psychologist. He's studying to try and see like why the Nazis in World War II were able to do the atrocities they did in like the concentration camps during the Holocaust, stuff like that. And so he was also studying the impact of authority on obedience and things like that. So basically what he did is he dressed up in a white lab coat. He brought some participants in. He set up this study so that basically you would flip a coin, but it was kind of, and I'm simplifying here, but two participants would come in. One would be the teacher, one would be the learner. Flip a coin, and then the learner, the real subject of the experiment was always the teacher, and the learner was a confederate of the experiment. So they knew they were in on it. They'd be separated by like this very thin wall, and then they'd be asked to basically the teacher would ask a series of memorization questions, just like memorize these words, repeat them back to me. If you get one wrong, they administer a small electric shock, right? And then they turn the dial up, and then the next time they get one wrong, they administer a larger electric shock, and on and on and on and on until we kind of, it was supposed to be a study on learning, punishment and learning. And so the teacher, they thought, oh man, I'm glad I'm the teacher and not the learner. I sure lucked out there. So they start reading these cards, and the learners, who again are in on the experiment. So, don't let that freak you out too much. The learners are in on the experiment. They would get a question wrong on purpose, and then receive a small electric shock and scream and be in pain. Then as this experiment would progress, there would be greater and greater electric shocks. And these shocks are labeled on the dial that once it goes past a certain point, they're dangerous. And these people who were the teachers, they'd get all the way up to the dangerous level and then turn and look, and the researcher would be there standing there in a white lab coat and be like, the experiment must continue. And so the teacher would carry on and push the dial past these dangerous levels and all the way into where it was marked as like lethal levels. And they'd say the experiment must continue. And they'd keep, they were obviously grief stricken while they were doing it, but they kept on administering these electric shocks, even when the person on the other side was screaming their head off and begging and pleading and saying, no, please, I want to stop. They'd look at the at the guy in the white lab coat, and he'd say, the experiment must continue, and basically just talk them into it. And these guys, these teachers would keep administering these electric shocks. The guy would be like, I have a heart condition, please. And then after a while, he'd stop responding, presumably unconscious or dead. But the rules of the experiment were that non-response is a failure. And so a lot of these guys would crank it up to lethal levels, basically think that they'd killed a guy over an experiment, a dumb experiment. And they do it because of a guy in a white lab coat who tells them that it's okay. Right. The stakes are not high, but they do it anyways. And this was a horrific experiment that revealed a lot about human nature. It's been replicated lots and lots of times over different groups of people, different races, ethnicities, nationalities, everything. People seem to really be capable of hideous things under the right circumstances if they believe that authority requires them to do what they're told. And so, yeah, a lot of these people, I think it was like over 80% of people would basically kill people with an electric shock over nothing, because someone in a white lab coat told them to, right? That's a horrific thing to learn about humans. And if you think that you're not capable of that, I have some really, really bad news for 85% of you. So that has been the Science Corner. Something to think about too. Chew on that a little bit. And definitely if you're interested, there are lots of resources you can find. Even just like Google it and read the Wikipedia on it or something like that. That would give you a better idea of what's happened. But there are books and things you can pick up as well. Maybe I'll recommend one of those at a different time. Anyways, this has been the Science Corner. We are going now over to the History Corner. All right, welcome to the History Corner, and today we are talking about the history of forensics. And I want to talk to you about the oldest known kind of, this is definitely apocryphal, right? But the oldest supposedly known use of forensic science to solve a crime. And it dates back to 6th century China. There was a murder, a grisly murder, and the local poobah was brought in to investigate. Whoever was in charge of being, solving crimes back then, I guess. I don't know what their title would be. Detective, we'll call him ancient detective, brought into this crime scene to figure out what went on. And so he finds the person, examines the body. He looks at the wounds and he goes, interesting. So he goes out and he hangs up some pigs and he starts using a bunch of different bladed weapons on these pigs. And he determines through his scientific process there that the likely weapon that was used on this person's body is a sickle. And so what he does is he sends out a call for all of the men in town to gather and bring their sickles. And he goes down the line and applies a little bit of water to the blade of all of these sickles as he's going down the line. And he tells them to stand there in the sun. And as legend has it, a bunch of flies came up and buzzed around the sickle of the guy who supposedly did the murder. And that would indicate that the flies are, some yummy dead guy is still on this sickle, right? And so long story short, they find the guy and he confesses, whether under torture or whatever, to murdering this other guy. He's executed and we all lived happily ever after, except for the people who were killed and potentially the guy who got away with it, because that's probably not actually a good way to figure out, maybe a fly landed on someone's sickle and they're like, aha. Maybe not actually a great way to do it, but also kind of cool and clever. And the Chinese are kind of known for like really clever stories about really clever things. And so maybe this happened, maybe this didn't. But it certainly, I think, shows how cool forensic science can be, even in ancient times. All right, we're done. Now we're moving over to what I'm most excited for, and that is the Random Corner. Okay, so welcome to the Random Corner. And as I said today, I have something exciting that I wanted to talk about. First things first, standard disclaimers apply. I am a law student. I am not a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is basic legal information that you can get anywhere. That said, today you're getting it from me. And I want to preface this as well by saying that I have nothing but the utmost respect for law enforcement and for people who put themselves in the line of fire to protect the rule of law, for the prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges and everyone all the way up the criminal justice hierarchy, particularly in the United States, whose system I am most familiar with. I think the vast majority of people are good at their jobs and really are in it to make the world a better place and to stop the bad guys. And that's what I am about. I really have a ton of respect for that. That said, the system isn't perfect. And I need to tell you, dear listener, that if something funny goes on in your neighborhood and the police come to you to talk to you, please do not talk to the police. Talk to a lawyer. We're kind of programmed to help the police in any way we can. And certainly if you witnessed someone else committing the crime, obviously talk to the police, right? But if they're just like knocking on doors and like, hey, can we ask you some questions about where you were the other night? The answer is unfortunately always no. You don't talk to the police. Don't be afraid that this makes you look like more of a suspect. Just tell them, I'm sorry, I don't talk to the police. I'd like to help in any way that I can. I didn't see anything or hear anything. I was here all night or whatever. Don't give them an alibi. Actually, don't even say I was here all night. Just say, I'm sorry, I didn't see or hear anything. You can maybe ask them, what they're looking for. See if there is any possible way that you might have seen something somewhere, like, oh, I saw so-and-so in the park or in a hoodie. But just know that the police are going door to door canvassing because they probably don't have any leads. And you might inadvertently give them a lead that implicates you. And if you do that, and it's one of these hard to crack cases, and there's a lot of pressure on the prosecutor because, I don't know, maybe it's a little girl that went missing or something like that. There's going to be a ton of pressure on them to solve this case. And you might inadvertently say something like, oh, yeah, I went for a walk in the park last night at around 8 p.m. Why? And then your neighbors will be like, oh, I saw a guy who was in a hoodie and he was in the park. And they're like, do you have a hoodie? And you're like, yeah, I got hoodies. I got hoodies coming out of my ears. Right. You might inadvertently be building a case against yourself for something that you did not do. It's just so much safer for you to just say no. Right. And kind of the other thing, and this book that I'm talking about today mentions it. There have been people who have taken the fall for crimes that they definitely did not commit. There have been hundreds of people put to death for crimes that they did not commit. Certainly throughout history, but in the United States alone, the number is not insignificant of people who have later been exonerated by DNA evidence that they were not the person who killed the people that they were accused of killing. But the trial went on and the jury found them guilty, and then they were sentenced to death or life in prison, right? It's just too risky. You're playing with your own life. The safest thing for you to do is say, sorry, I don't know anything. I can't help you. Goodbye. Right. And if they do have other evidence, they will, believe me, 100% be coming back to your door. If they keep showing up, call a lawyer right away. Don't take your chances with this. This is your life you're talking about here. This is a public service announcement. Please listen. It's important. It's important not only for you, but it's important to the victim's family. It's important to the police who are investigating that they find the guy who really did it. And if you end up running your mouth, you could really, really detour the investigation. You could say some things that hurt the chances of justice being done and improve the chances of you ending up strapped to a gurney and being given a lethal injection for something that you did not do. Don't fool around with this stuff, guys. It's serious. This has been the Random Corner. This has been my little public service announcement. We're done. We're going back to the main review, and we're going to wrap it up quick. Thank you so much. Back to the review. Okay, welcome back to the main review, and I have another lawyer joke for you guys today, and this one I think is kind of a good one. So without further ado, here we go. A man walks into a bar with his giant pet alligator. He walks up to the bartender and says, "Excuse me, sir, I hate to trouble you, but do you serve lawyers here?" And the man said, "Well, yeah, of course we do." He said, "Great. I'll take a beer and I'll have a lawyer for my gator." Classic. Okay. Oh yeah, the review. It's time. Let's actually just jump right into it. Let's do the quick, super duper, ultra, mega, amazing review of The Bells, whose name I still need to figure out a better name for. I'm just going to call it the review of The Bells, actually, maybe. It's time for the review of The Bells. Oh, that sounds lofty. I like that. Review of The Bells. Nice. Anyways, yeah, that's a 4-star book for sure. You definitely want to check it out. Definitely want to get it. It's not quite to the level of 5 stars, but it's definitely above the level of 3 stars. And that's why I feel like 4 stars is a fair review for it, because as many people know, 4 comes between 3 and 5. And if 5 is the highest number and 3 represents a mediocre book, then I want to express using bells or stars, as the case may be, that this book here is not mediocre, but also not the best book I've ever read. So I feel confident, very confident, that 4 stars is the appropriate place for me to put this book. You should get it. If you like true crime, you'll like this. I can basically guarantee it. Now, let's wrap up the show with our parting thought. I hated that little soundbite as soon as I played it there. So, but I'm going to leave it in just so that you can experience kind of the evolution of this podcast as we go. I'm definitely not going to use that to usher in the parting thought next time. So don't worry. Today's parting thought, though, is from Ayn Rand. And I don't agree with a lot of what Ayn Rand says. I agree with some of what she says. I don't agree with a lot of what she says. But I did think that this was interesting, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot in the light of not only this forensic pathology case where the idea is to find people who definitely are criminals. But this is something that I've been thinking about in kind of the context of our broader criminal justice system. And there's something to this quote. So I'm gonna give it to you. You can mull it around. You can think what you will of it. You can disagree with it. Please do, actually. But it's something that made me stop and think when I read it. So here we go. Quote, "There's no way to rule innocent men. The only power any government has is the power to crack down on criminals. Well, when there aren't enough criminals, one makes them. One declares so many things to be a crime that it becomes impossible for men to live without breaking laws." And that was Ayn Rand. And it's certainly a cynical approach to criminal justice. And I'm not going to say that I agree with it completely, because I think as a general rule, particularly with violent crimes, we're in a good place as far as what we say is a crime and what we say is not a crime. However, we're in danger in our society if you live in the United States, and certainly if you live in the United Kingdom, which is another judicial system that I'm fairly familiar with. If you live in one of these countries, there's a lot of laws that you might be breaking and have no idea that you're breaking them. I read a book recently, and maybe I'll review it actually at a different time once I kind of come around to maybe if I ever catch up to the books that I'm reading, I'll go back to some that I've already read. In fact, I'd like to do that at some future time. But I read this book by this guy. He's a lawyer, and he talks about how there are hundreds and hundreds of federal crimes that you can be charged with that there's a good chance you have no idea that you've committed them. And there's no way you could ever know about them unless you were just like a statutory legal scholar who just for fun just went through the United States Code, right? I have read through the United States Code, not all of it, but a really good chunk of it for a research project I had to do for a law school professor. And it is boring and dull and also horrifically poorly written, right? And I was looking for specific things that the professor was looking for as I was doing it. But as I was going through it, I was like, wow, this is archaic and bad and badly written. And I'm not sure what this law even means. So you'd have to be really, really, smart. You'd have to be a legal scholar, and you'd have to be so diligent to want to even read through those in the first place, or like a psycho. And even then, you probably wouldn't catch all of the ways that the government has criminalized certain behaviors, right? And you might have no idea that you're doing this. Say you go off to college and you bring your potted plant with you or something like that. You cross state lines, boom, felony, right? You can do 20 years for that. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but there are steep fines and jail time associated with really, really mundane activities, right? Mixing chemicals while you're cleaning, that is a crime. Mixing that you might not be aware of. Planting certain things in certain places is a crime. Taking animals from one place to another is a crime. Chopping down a tree in your backyard can be a crime, right? Shooting an animal, for food, can certainly be a crime, right? If you're hunting without a license or without the right tags and things like that. A lot of people are aware of the rules if they're really kind of into it, but there are a lot of places you can stumble onto if you're not really aware of what's going on. You can be like, oh, maybe I'll go hunting today. Maybe you don't know about hunting laws. Maybe you're a first timer and you're like, oh, there's some deer out in this field. I know where they're at. So you go and you pick up, maybe you even pick up a bow and arrow or something. I don't know. And go out to the field and start, taking pot shots at these deer because they look yummy. You could do some serious jail time for doing that, right? There's all sorts of things that we should, I think we should be made aware that crime is not black and white. Certainly violent crime is more so, but even that, it's not black and white. But it's something that we should be aware of, that there's this drift now to criminalizing a lot of really mild behavior. And there's a lot of laws that, you might be a felon and not even know it. There might be some random thing you've done in your life that makes you a criminal and you have no idea. And that's not cool. There's probably something that needs to be done there. I'm not sure what. It's just something to think about. Maybe if you're, I don't know, my local senator. I know my senators tend to listen to this. If you're if you're listening to this, state senator, please do something about that. Talk to someone about that. I don't know what else to say about this other than it was very interesting. It's something that I've been thinking about, something that maybe you could do with thinking about. let's figure it out. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to pick up this book, the link will be in the description. If you go through that and buy that link, buy the book through that link, then you will help out this podcast. It'll be super useful to me. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to it, share it to someone who you think would get a kick out of it. Leave a review if that's possible on your podcasting platform. All of these things that you can do help to propel this podcast to more listeners. And that's what I am looking for. And I have been really, really flattered and overwhelmed by all the people who are listening to this, all the great feedback that I've gotten. We're breaking into hundreds of listens now. So that's actually really cool for me. I'm very, very excited. Please continue sharing it. Please continue passing it along. It means a lot to me. And hopefully these books mean something to you. I encourage you to pick them up and read them. If true crime is not your thing, don't pick up this one. I promise I will do a more mild book next time. Thank you so much. Have a good day. You deserve it.